Good morning. Hello and welcome everyone for today's session on tackling endpoint security risk with risk assessment. I would quickly like to introduce about SISA information security. SISA information security is a global security specialist serving across a wide range of industries with a footprint more than in 35 countries. SISA has unique expertise in payment security domain and forensic investigation. SISA is one of the top 20 organizations to be a part of PCI SSC Gear Committee. Also like to quickly introduce our speaker, Mr. Kaushik Pandey. Kaushik is a principal consultant at SISA Information Security. He has done audits for various industries into different industries like IT, BPOs, airlines, and gateways. He is an authorized lead trainer for CPISI, a payment security training program for imparting knowledge on payment security implementation. And a QSA can look out for a successful audit and certification from a compliant perspective. Housekeeping items. Today's webinar would last for 60 minutes, including question and answer session for 5 minutes each during the webinar. If you have any questions arise during the webinar, you can submit your questions in a section below located on the screen. All the attendees would be kept in a mute mode, and the speaker would present without any interruption. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded in webinar section of SISA's website and also on our YouTube page, SISA Information Security.
Thanks a lot for that, Ashwini. And welcome everyone to this particular series of sessions which we have been doing during this particular pandemic. Myself, Kaushik, as has been introduced by Ashwini, and we hope that, we wish that all of you are safe and sound at your home and taking due care in these particular circumstances. All right. So, this particular session, or let's say this particular webinar, is a part of, let's say, many webinars which we have been doing from the past 2 to 3 months. We had been doing webinars in the past as well, but right now, in the past 2 or 3 months, we have a specific objective in mind when we are doing these kind of webinar sessions. Over here, we are trying to find out the real challenge what the organizations are facing as of now and trying to solve those challenges. So we started with work from home, that okay, how exactly organization has to take care of the work from home. We came across with the MDR EDR solutions, or let's say how exactly those can help tackle the risk. We came across with a few more technical webinars in the meantime, and now we are at the risk assessment webinar, which is a need of the hour as we speak right now. So why exactly do we need this particular risk assessment, or what is the need, let's say, in today's market to even go ahead and perform a risk assessment in this pandemic situation in nature? I guess many of us will acknowledge this particular fact that none of us actually get a pass, or let's say none of us actually gets a ticket. Okay, we won't be impacted, or let's say our cybersecurity posture will not be impacted during this crisis. And I believe that is what something all of us are looking at every day to day. There are so many commercial password managers which basically are fake applications, which have, of course, a huge vulnerability in them as well. There are so many zero-day vulnerabilities which are rising each and every event. There are IT security professionals who have access to data which they shouldn't even have access to. And then there comes the enterprise ransomware infection. Now, with these many threats, with these many challenges right now happening in the market, what we thought is, let's try and understand the objective, or let's say the core problem, the core challenges of the organization, for which risk assessment is the best possible way to achieve the same. Is organizations need to understand their security posture, map it with the rest of the world, with the rest of the world's threats, vulnerabilities, and all, and see where exactly they stand, and accordingly prepare for the future. So, keeping that particular perspective in mind, we have drafted this particular webinar into four sections. First of all, we'll be discussing about okay, what are the threats, what are the let's say critical vulnerabilities in the world, which were there yesterday and which are still there today as well. A few predictions that have come from top-notch cybersecurity organizations, and of course a few cybersecurity attacks as well, which are the most prevalent right now in the market, especially during this particular pandemic situation. Now, once we have understood that, okay, what exactly is leading this risk assessment, or what exactly are the major threats which are there, let's say across the organizations, then we'll be talking about the risk assessment. First of all, we'll discuss, okay, why exactly risk assessment is required, and then we'll be talking about the entire risk assessment approach. Now, this particular risk assessment approach which we have taken is basically a combination of ISO 27005 and Octave framework. And we have tried to take the security control, the technical security control evaluation from the NIST cybersecurity framework as well. Once we have covered that, okay, what all different steps have to be there inside the risk assessment, what we'll do is that we will take one of the let's say a sample risk assessment scenario based upon one of the latest breaches, one of the latest ransomware breaches which have happened right now in the market. Okay, and we'll tell you that, okay, how exactly risk assessment would have been done, or let's say should have been done in such a scenario if that particular organization would have taken a threat-based risk assessment methodology, and accordingly maybe would have saved them. And accordingly, we'll be talking about the risk treatment controls as well. And lastly, we'll be talking about, or let's say we'll be winding up, we'll be talking about the summary of that, okay, how exactly remote working, or let's say the controls towards the remote working is, let's say, attains the security. We'll be talking about one of the very famous, you can say, methodologies which many of the organizations are implementing, which is the Lincoln Laboratory, which have around 20 critical security controls, and how exactly each and every threat can be managed with a combination of those critical security controls. And lastly, we'll be talking about the future, that okay, how exactly the future looks like after this particular pandemic is over. So with that in mind, with that particular approach in mind, let's see that okay, how exactly we are going to move forward from here onwards. In the words of Anthony de Saint-Exupéry, the time for action is now, and it's never too late to do something. If our organizations at the end of the day think that, okay, so many threats, so many vulnerabilities are arising every day by day, I do not have money, I do not have these technical security controls, and I'll just keep my hand on the other hand, I will just sit and see that, okay, that okay, my organization will get exfiltrated, or let's say will get breached some or the other day. So let's wait for it. Right? So that is not something which is the right approach. Whatever technologies we have, whatever people we have, whatever, let's say, technical competency we have to secure our organization based upon the same. And how exactly you can secure it? First of all, by looking at that, okay, what are different threats are actually available in the market. So based upon the case study, around 95% of the breach records actually came from one of the three industries, that is government, retail, and technology. So if you're falling under any one of these, of course, you are in a high risk zone. Based upon the frequency, there is a hacker attack in every 39 seconds. So likewise, let's say we have, let's say, spent around 10 minutes right now in this particular webinar. Okay, it means that I don't know how many, let's say 200 to 300, let's say attacks might have happened at the end. Equivalent to around 291 records are actually stolen every second, and that was a case study in the 2018. That too. Out of these many security breaches, it's found out that 95% of them are due to human error. And more than 77% of the organizations, even after these many threats, these many vulnerabilities, these many attacks, they do not have a security incident response plan. Even even after that, organizations are spending, or let's say will spend around $6 trillion by the end of 2021 with respect to all the vulnerabilities, all the threats which have happened lately. I guess ransomware WannaCry is not something which is out of the blue, right? Most of us know about this particular ransomware which happened lately, and that particular ransomware actually costed around $4 billion to the entire globe. Then came the NotPetya ransomware, which raised the bar and actually costed $10 billion. It's a very fact that actually 200,000 malware samples are created every day, and one in every 100 email actually contains a malware. Many of them actually are blocked by your email filters, by your email engines, or let's say by your mail service providers, which you do not get. But actually, when we are talking about the statistics, about one in every 100 email contains a malware. And that is the way reason why you will see number of biggest data breaches which have happened starting from 2011 to 2018, which contains the Yahoo as well, which actually compromised around 3 billion records at the end, including the Marriott with 500 million records, the Quora with 100 million, the Facebook with 30 million records, the Equifax with 143 million records. You'll find that some or the other way they are related to either phishing attack, either ransomware, or something or the other. And that is basically what even the major technological service providers also are saying, that ransomware will be the critical threat in 2020. And that is what exactly we are looking at right now. If you'll see some reports from WatchGuard, the McAfee, the ForcePoint, each and every one of them are saying that, okay, phishing, the ransomware, and these types of attacks will be prevalent in this particular region, or in this particular 2020. Now, so many, you can say, technological solutions coming into place and actually telling you, or let's say telling us that, okay, ransomware, be aware of ransomware, be aware of phishing attacks and all. Why? Because they are gonna hit a $20 billion tab in 2021, and that is the prediction again. And the average ransomware attack costs a company around $5 million, and 92% of the malwares are delivered via emails. So with these many phishing attacks, with these many, you can say, malware attacks, or let's say ransomware, it's very important for organizations to prevent themselves from these types of attacks, or let's say from these types of threats. And that is what is basically, let's say, our approach towards the risk assessment. That is the way reason why we need the risk assessment, because we are looking at so many threats, so many threat actors exploiting so many vulnerabilities every day. If I am dealing with government or retail or technology or any one of these three, then of course I am in a target zone. So with these threats, my organization, or let's say I as a security advisor, should be prepared that if this particular threat impacts my organization, my security controls, then I should be ready with it and should accordingly respond around the same. And that is where the risk assessment is required, which is a threat-based risk assessment. So the risk assessment is basically, or let's say, evaluates the current status of the organization. It evaluates that particular, let's say, the current status of the organization with the probability of that particular organization being exposed to threats and vulnerabilities. And that is the way reason why risk assessment is required when you are, let's say, strategizing with respect to, let's say, your organization critical security controls. You are planning it, you are evaluating the critical security controls and all those things. And the risk is basically what drives your organization's security posture. It might be required based upon many of the compliances, or let's say many of the things which you are maintaining at the end of the day. However, risk assessment is far more, you can say, important as compared to just the checkbox in any one of the compliance rules, or let's say any of the compliance guidelines. Because this is what drives your internal security policy of any organization. If you have PCI DSS, if you have ISO 27001, if you have HIPAA, if you have GDPR, any one of them. If you haven't done a thorough risk assessment, many of, let's say, the science might say the privacy impact assessment, or whatever the name you want to call it, then you cannot say that, okay, I have tried and reduced the risk exposure to my organization as much as I can. No, I'm sorry, sir, but you haven't done this. You haven't attained that particular, let's say, statement from me that yes, let's say you are able to reduce, because you do not have a risk assessment with you. You have not performed a thorough risk assessment for your organization. Then how exactly can you say that, let's say you have secure, or let's say you have a controlled majority of the risk inside the organization? No, you cannot. And that is the very reason why exactly risk assessment fail in today's, let's say, into today's world. Majority of the organizations do not even have a formalized process of risk assessment. What they generally do is they will just gather a few people, a few folks from across, let's say, different departments, and will say that, okay, what exactly risk do you think that, okay, our organization is having? Basically, what they are doing at that time, they're just discussing the problems. They're just saying that, okay, I'm having this problem, I'm having that problem, and all. This is not exactly a risk assessment. Most of the organizations do not even have an acceptable risk level. Majority of the organizations, or let's say the chief cybersecurity experts, will say that, okay, I will make sure that, okay, all the risks are eliminated. Now, this particular statement sounds good, but can it be implemented? Not at all. It's an unrealistic, you can say, statement itself. Poor timings of risk assessment is another factor. Organizations do not even know that, okay, when exactly to perform the risk assessment. They perform, let's say, once a year, that's it. And then after that, they are implementing so many changes inside the organization that they are not even bothered about the risk assessment being conducted, because threats and vulnerabilities are increasing, or let's say impacting every day. Now, we are not saying that, okay, you have to perform risk assessment every day. Whenever you are changing even a small critical security change, if you are doing inside the organization, you should see that, okay, how exactly the risk around it is being controlled by your organization. Do you have enough number of controls so that if that particular asset, that particular critical asset is being compromised, then your critical security controls would be able to prevent that particular exploitation. Wrong team members. Now, wrong team members is like, I think all of us will agree with. That we ourselves do not know that, okay, who exactly should be in this particular risk assessment team. Many times organizations tend to include the team members which are actually from the impacted areas. When you are from the impacted area, you might, let's say, come back and say that, let's say, I do not have a risk. Why? Because they know that if this particular, let's say, risk is being raised inside the risk assessment report, then they have to do twice or thrice work. Then in that particular case, they will not even talk about that. They will say that, okay, everything is controlled, everything is fine. That's not an issue at all. And the second factor is that many of the staff level, many of the workforce level employees are not even taken into consideration when a risk assessment is being done, because those are actually the people who are actually, you can say, experiencing risk, experiencing threats, vulnerabilities, and all. The first hand knowledge, the first hand, you can say, feedback should be coming from them, which is basically not taken care of. And lastly, whosoever is performing the risk assessment do not have an authority to do anything. They will just prepare a risk assessment report, they will just submit it, that's it, done. Then after that, that particular risk assessment is gone. So with these many footfalls, with these many challenges, with these many things, it becomes really, really necessary for organizations to perform the risk assessment so that they can control the security posture of the organizations and accordingly enhance the security controls which they have, so that they will be able to reduce the risk exposure as much as they can. On that particular note, we will just, let's say, give a pause for another 1 or 2 minutes. We'll see if we have any questions. We'll answer it, and then we move to the next section. As let's say we are expecting a few questions coming out, even if let's say you guys are trying to skip right now because we haven't covered the risk assessment currently, we will be doing that in some time. You can just see a few stats over here that 53% of the companies had over 1,000 plus sensitive files open to every employee. And the data breaches exposed around 4.1 billion records in the first half of 2019. So with so many threats, with so many vulnerabilities happening every day to day, I guess it becomes really, really important for organizations to actually take care of the risk. Can you highlight on how the risk assessment conducted is not subjective? Risk assessment is something which we will discuss right now. We haven't actually covered the risk assessment part. So once you have gone through the entire risk assessment, you can say methodology which we have created, along with the one of the sample risk assessment scenarios which we have, then I believe that we'll be able to answer your question. Or if this particular question is not answered even till then we can cover it at that time. I hope that's fine. All right, with that in mind, let's resume the session because we have a lot to cover right now. Okay, great. So, the cybersecurity risk assessment. Now, as I told you in the very introduction, let's say when we started the entire session at that time itself, I told you that the risk assessment framework which we have devised is a combination of ISO 27005 and Octave. Many of you might be knowing the Octave as an operational critical threat and asset vulnerability evaluation, which is one of the top-notch risk assessment methodologies available. Along with that, of course, ISO 27005 is something which doesn't need an introduction in today's market. However, when these types of, you can say, risk assessment methodologies are used, majority of the risk assessors do not understand that, okay, what exactly should be the baseline of security controls upon which they should evaluate these organizations. Because they have to evaluate that, okay, what all different controls you have. And that particular control should be mapped with a particular checklist, or let's say with a particular series of security controls. And that is the way reason why we use this cybersecurity framework, because that is one of the, let's say, the most you can say hybrid or most mature cybersecurity framework which is right now available, and majority of the organizations are actually going ahead and using the same. So with that particular thing in mind, let's start the risk assessment, or let's see how what all different steps are there. So the first one comes is the scope evaluation. Now it's very important for organizations to define a scope whenever they are performing the risk assessment. Now, this particular risk assessment can include the entire organization. This particular risk assessment can include only a LOB, only a line of business which you are trying to, let's say, perform the risk assessment upon. And during this particular risk assessment, many of the organizations tend to even micromanage it and say that, okay, the highest risk areas will be assessed first and more frequently in that particular manner. So scope evaluation, the scope assessment, or let's say defining the scope, definition of the scope plays a major role. Because if you're not able to define a proper scope inside the organization, then it will become unmanageable. For example, let's say you are having an ODC environment, you are having a BPO environment. Now, in that particular case, the BPO or the ODC, with respect to the client's infrastructure, the interface with the client's infrastructure will be one of my highest risk priorities. So that particular scope, that particular, let's say, environment should be assessed first and more frequently as compared to the other departments, or let's say the other domains which your organization might be having. So once you have defined the scope, once you have the, let's say, scoping, or let's say the scope of the business clearly, the second thing is the analysis team. Now, the analysis team is something which you will not find in ISO 27005. So this is something which has been taken from the Octave framework. Now, as I told you that when we were discussing about the challenges with respect to risk assessment, at that time we saw that majority of the organizations say that whosoever performed the risk assessment do not even have the authority to do anything. It was just a report. The report went off. That's it. Done. They were not from a C-level executive, or let's say they were not even reporting to a C-level executive at any point in time. And that is the very reason why analysis team is required. Now, this particular analysis team competence should be of IT plus business. It should not just be technical, it should not be business, or is it just business? Why? It's because they need to understand the business and the criticality, or let's say the vision of the organization. They should not just understand that okay, let's say it's a business use case, so I have to sell this particular product irrespective of let's say technological vulnerabilities which are at place inside a server, I can go ahead with it. No, you should also understand that, okay, let's say if I'm having let's say a server, let's say an Apache server which is having an unpatched vulnerability, which is having an unpatched, you can say Apache struts from framework vulnerability. They should know that, okay, this particular vulnerability was used by, let's say, a particular intruder and exposed around millions of records. Okay, so in that particular sense, they should understand the IT plus business, and they should be open to add other experts as and when required. Why? It's because many times they might need subject matter experts from different domains. Like, let's say if I'm going on and talking about a fintech industry, now that particular the IT plus business guy might not know that much about the fintech. So what they'll do is that they'll call somebody inside the organization only, that okay, they can give more insights about the business in the fintech industry, so that accordingly they can map the threats and vulnerabilities with that particular fintech domain, that particular scope. Now, basis upon the scope evaluation, analysis team formulation, the next thing is to understand the current practices. Now, what exactly this current practices will give you? The current practices will give you that, okay, what your organization considers as assets and critical assets, basically. What exactly are their major security requirements? What exactly protection strategies they think are really, really important? And what exactly are the critical organizational vulnerabilities in nature? And how you'll get to know about these things? You will have discussions. You will have discussions with major stakeholders inside the organization, like let's say senior management. Senior management, first of all, you'll go and understand that, okay, let's say from a governance point of view, from a governance angle, what exactly challenges are you facing? What exact security requirements, what protection vulnerabilities, what organizational vulnerabilities are you looking at right now? Okay, and what you think are the most critical asset. Now, for them, the most critical asset over there can be, let's say, the PII data. The most critical asset can be the front-facing, public-facing servers. Or if I'm talking about a bank, the most critical asset can be the CBS or the CMS systems. Now I'll go one step below and I'll talk about the operational staff, your IT managers, your network admins, your sysadmins, and the others as well. Now for them, what exactly might be the critical asset? The connection towards that particular system or that particular server, that particular application. Because if they do not have a connection, if they're not able to maintain a proper connection, proper authentication and all, then they will not be able to perform their work. For staff, it can be different again. For staff, the critical assets might be their endpoints. For staff, the critical assets, or let's say the critical threats which they might be facing, might be these hundreds of spam emails which they are getting every now and then. Now, many of these spam emails, as we discussed it before, that one in around 100 email contains a malware. So these things would be understood from a staff level knowledge. Now, based upon these, the entire, you can say, the discussions which you will have based upon the meetings, interviews, the discussions, and everything, you will be able to formulate a threat profile where you will have a critical asset, major security requirements, primary protection strategies, and critical organizational vulnerabilities. Now, once I have evaluated, let's say the the current security posture from a stakeholder's perspective, or let's say from a discussion perspective, it's also important for organizations to go ahead and evaluate their technical stack as well, the technical security stack. So that is the very reason why they will go ahead and evaluate the strategic practices like this training, the staff, the security policies and regulations, and the other things. They will evaluate the physical security, the IT security. Now, with respect to IT security, they will go ahead and evaluate the encryption, the monitoring and auditing, IT security, the VAPT practices, and the others as well. They'll be talking about staff security, where they'll be talking about the incident management and the current normal remote workforce security. Even over here, they will go ahead and understand that, okay, let's say the IPsec VPN or the SL VPN certificates, or if let's say you have deployed a zero trust security model or something like that, how exactly it's let's say security you are maintaining over there. You might be having a BYOD policy. You might be having a mobile device, the MDM, you can say policy. So all these things need to be evaluated. Now, how exactly you will evaluate? You will be evaluating basis upon the production system and configuration review. You will be evaluating based upon the sampling, absolutely. Because if let's say I'm talking about an organization with 100,000 assets, then you cannot go ahead and evaluate 100,000 assets over there. So you need to have a stratified sampling being used over there. You can use tools so as to identify critical assets inside the organization. You can look at the VAPT report so as to understand that, okay, where exactly the organization's technical security vulnerabilities map with the latest vulnerability stack. And then, of course, you will have an interview, you will have discussions, and all those things happening at the end. Now, with that particular, let's say, that step, you will be in a good position to understand that, okay, what exactly are the current practices the organization have. Now, based upon this, I would have a threat profile being calculated, where I'll have the internal and the external threats to my organization. I'll have my IT threats, I'll have the miscellaneous, and I'll have the cloud service provider threats as well. Now, with these many threats, with these many things, there's only one thing remaining, which is the asset. So just to clarify a few things, or let's say just to make it simpler, we define these, let's say the asset into two types, primary and supporting. So primary, let's take the information, the data as a primary asset at all the times, like let's say the PII data, the SN number, the card number, okay? These types of, you can say the data elements can be considered the primary asset, and the supporting can be the database server, can be the application server, can be the KMS which you are using, okay? Anything, whichever is trying to protect the, let's say the primary asset, or is interacting directly with the primary asset, can be taken as a supporting asset. And that is how you'll be able to achieve the asset containerization, so as to evaluate the technological vulnerabilities. So what do I have now? I have the asset. I had the primary and the supporting asset. I have the threat, and what exactly a threat is something which, okay, which we are afraid of happening. What we have the vulnerability, we have the weakness inside the organization based upon the VAPT reports, based upon the stakeholders' perspective, and all those things. Okay, and then we have the mitigation. Now, mitigation right now, we're talking from a risk assessment angle and not from a risk management angle. It means that when we evaluated the current practices and we talked about the technical security controls, we actually got to know that, okay, I do have this much risk, or let's say I do have a high risk. However, based upon the technical security controls which I've implemented, it has been reduced to medium, because I already have, let's say, I have already achieved 50%, or let's say 70% of what I need to achieve at the end of the day. So it's very important that, okay, I should have a mitigation factor as well over there. So based upon the asset threat and vulnerability, now we'll be doing the risk assessment. Now in the risk assessment, first of all, the first factor which will go inside will be the asset value. Now the asset value, the table which we'll be using, and I'll show you in some time when we are doing a sample risk assessment scenario, is a table which we have taken from the ISO 27005, in which I'll be defining primary and supporting asset. Post which I'll be talking about threats. Now threats can be of two types always. It can be either internal or external. Every threat, each and every threat, whatever you want to categorize, you can always categorize in two types, internal or external. and accordingly you will have the internal threat. Now, internal threat over here will be measuring up with a value known as LHOT, a likelihood of occurrence of threat. Now, this particular likelihood of occurrence of threat is something which, let's say, we will be using it in a qualitative manner and not quantitative. Okay, and that's why it's a hybrid approach. So, qualitative can be, let's say, low, medium, or high at any point in time, because it's a probability that okay, a threat might impact the vulnerability, might impact the weakness of a particular asset. Okay, then comes the vulnerability, the level of vulnerability, that which is related to the supporting asset. Why am I saying it's related to the supporting asset? Because if, let's say, I'm considering a PII data, like let's say a social security number, so a social security number itself will not have a weakness, but the supporting asset which is around it, like let's say a database server or an application server, or let's say a firewall, will be having some vulnerabilities, some weaknesses. So vulnerability value, the LOV value, will be dependent upon the supporting asset. And lastly, based upon the asset threat and vulnerability value, we'll be coming up with the measure of risk, or let's say the risk value. So this is the entire step-by-step approach towards, you can say, performing a risk assessment. And then sometime we will be, you can say, evaluating one of the risk assessment scenarios as well, where we'll be discussing about these steps again. On that particular note, we'll again take a pause of 2 to 3 minutes. We'll answer a few questions and then accordingly we'll move ahead. So I'll try to answer the question which was actually asked initially. The question was that, okay, can you highlight on how the risk assessment conducted is not subjective? The risk assessment is always subjective to an organization. It's a risk assessment can never be the same for all the organizations in nature, and that is what something which we have just seen. Likewise, let's say, for example, when we evaluate the technical security controls, now at that time, your organization might be having a WAF in place, you might be having a honeypot or honeynet in place, you might be having, let's say, some other threat advisory services from FireEye or let's say from some other domain, which is actually looking at all the network traffic which is going in, coming in or going out. Now, these are extra level of security controls which you have implemented. At that time, you might say that the phishing attempt actually impacting my organization might be very less, or let's say the probability is very less. So in that particular case, the risk assessment which you might be doing for your organization might be considering ransomware as a low or a medium level risk. Whereas when I'm talking about, let's say, my organization where I only have a firewall in place, I might be considering that, okay, it's a high risk vulnerability for me, or let's say for my organization. Accordingly, let's say it will be entirely subjective, okay, to the organization, to a particular, let's say, the technical security controls, the stakeholders risk, and all those things, what you are critically functioning. I hope I was able to answer that question, which was asked initially. Right. So let's resume now. Leave we do not have any further questions. If we'll have, of course, we'll take it later again. So We have taken up actually a quote or actually something which was written by Shan Vavra in her blog, basically, which basically said that, okay, good hackers steal and great hackers borrow. It means that majority of the hackers, or let's say majority of the attackers or intruders, will not basically develop their own malware. They will just see the exploits which are available. They will try to, let's say, change it a bit, change a few payloads, change a few scripts inside it, and accordingly use it. And that is something which is used when we are talking about ransomware. Okay, so we have taken a particular case study where we are talking about a ransomware attack on the BPO industry. And over here, we have taken the ransomware to be the maze infection. Now, I don't know how many of you know about the maze infection or not, but recently it actually exploited, or let's say recently it compromised one of the uh, biggest IT service providers in the world. Okay, and that is something which even you can see it on the screens as well, that the portions which are colored in red are actually the countries, the continents which have been affected, impacted by this particular maze infection ransomware. Okay, now this particular maze infection ransomware, as I think many of you might be knowing that, okay, what exactly is a ransomware, is that it will get downloaded on your system, or let's say on any of the endpoints or servers. It will encrypt the data, and then it will ask for ransom from you so as to decrypt the data if you want to have access to it. And that's not alone. It will also blackmail you. That is, it will say that, okay, they have already created a backup of this particular data, what was there on your system or on your server. And if you fail to give them money about this, then they will just expose the entire data to the outer world. Okay, that is how exactly a ransomware works. However, with respect to this particular specific ransomware, the Maze ransomware, what it does is that it uses different types of exploit kits or the different types of entry points. A few, or let's say a few which are very readily used are, let's say, exploit kits. It also uses entry points with remote desktops with the weak passwords. It uses the email impersonation. It uses names of different companies, different agencies, and it also comes as a part of the word attachment, where macros, you can say, is being used, or let's say is enabled. And if you'll see on the right hand of your screen, these are actually the directories, types of files, the types of, you can say, extensions, which this ransomware doesn't even touch. So these are whitelisted from there, because the ransomware, or let's say this particular mail ransomware, knows that if they touch operating system files, the operating system configurations, then of course the user will not be able to even run their system. So how exactly the user will know that, okay, a ransomware has actually compromised the PII data? So they make sure that they do not touch the operating system files at any point in time. Okay, so all these are whitelisted basically, and accordingly they perform their actions on this. Okay. Now, I believe majority of you would have heard about this Maze ransomware recently, and that is how it says that, let's say, they give you a Bitcoin, you can say, wallet address, and accordingly you have to actually transfer Bitcoins to that particular wallet if you want to, let's say, see your data again. So on that particular note, let's try to perform a risk assessment for another organization, which can be, let's say an ODC, an offshore development center, who wants to, you can say, control, or let's say uh, secure their environment based upon the same. So scope, the very first step we saw, the scope will take an ODC, right, an offshore development center. And in the current circumstances, the offshore development center will be remote in nature, because each and every one of us are actually operating from our homes. The analysis team, now we understood that, okay, we had a huge challenge that the people who are a part of the analysis team do not even have a say when it comes to, let's say, the implementation things. So we took the VP IT, the Vice President of IT, as one of the analysis team members, and the second one will be, of course, the third-party assessor who is doing it. The next step, what we saw was the current practices. Now, let's say this particular organization, this ODC, let's say we performed interviews, we performed discussions, and we found out that the critical asset, what their senior management, their operational staff, and let's say the managers as well think are, let's say, the PI data, the financial informations, maybe some strategic, you can say, process documents as well, the CRM application, the end user systems, and the VPN connections, which they are using actually to connect to, let's say, their ODC or their infrastructure at the end from their home, of course. The major security requirements, what they think was that, let's say, the access controls and the network security are something which are the major security requirements and should be maintained at the end of the day. The primary protection strategies, which they think that, okay, how exactly they'll be able to protect themselves if some calamity, if something, or let's say if some challenge happens, is that, let's say, they will be able to have a cyber incident response team, a CIRT team, who will be able to respond to such types of attacks, to such type of breaches being happening across the organization, and they will be able to, let's say, uh, have this critical organizational vulnerabilities as irregular patching or third-party softwares installed on the systems, or the awareness training, the lack of awareness training inside the organization. And the current technical security control, the current controls will be that, okay, they are conducting once a year awareness training, they are having a firewall, they are having, let's say, an active directory, they might be having a PIM solution as well, a privileged entity management solution, and the other things. Now, based upon these things, based upon the current practices, I'll be able to, let's say, have a threat profile. I'll be able to understand that the IT threats which I might be interfacing right now will be a phishing attack, along with, or let's say, accompanied by a malware at the back end. The non-IT threats can be the physical intrusion or the shoulder surfing. Why am I saying this? Is because right now I'm talking about an ODC which is remote in nature. Now, physical intrusion into that particular, let's say, employee's premises, or a shoulder surfing being done by any of their friends who might have a malicious intent, will be a non-IT threat over here. And we haven't considered cloud service providers or any other miscellaneous threats over here. So according to the current practices, what we identified was that the primary asset is the PII data, which is available over emails and on the systems as well. And the supporting assets are the email servers, the web filter gateway, the endpoint systems, endpoint desktops or laptops, which, let's say, the people are using. So basis upon all of these things, what we do is that we perform a risk assessment. Now, in the risk assessment, what we do is that, first of all, we identify the primary asset. Now, the primary asset is the PII data. Now, the PII data, let's consider as the social security number. Now, the social security number might be there on the server, might be there on that particular server, but these agents might have access, or these ODC employees might have access to the PI data, and they might be able to copy it on the systems as well. It means that even their endpoints become a critical asset for organizations. The user awareness training, a policy from a policy standpoint, becomes a supporting asset. Why? Because this particular supporting asset, a user awareness training which is being conducted, will be used to secure the PII data at the end of the day, will be used to make sure that, let's say, if there is any fishy email, if there is any unsupported third-party softwares which are untrusted and all, should not be used by that particular employee. And then, of course, the endpoint protection will also be acting as a supporting asset. Now let's consider the threat. Now, threat, as I said, that, okay, we are considering ransomware maze over here. That will be the threat, which is an external in nature. And I give it a value of high. Now, this is something which we have taken from the table which is there on the right-hand side corner of your screen. Now, this particular table actually gives you the asset value from 0 to 4, 0 being the least and 4 being the maximum. The likelihood of occurrence of threat, that okay, what is the probability of that particular threat exploiting the vulnerability, or let's say what exactly the probability of the threat is actually is there of impacting. So it can be low, medium, or high. And then ease of exploitation can again be low, medium, or high. That is the level of vulnerability, the weakness. Okay. Based upon this external ransomware, what I did was I considered as a high. Why? Because my people, my organizational people are actually working remotely. They are having access to emails. They are getting lots of phishing emails, or is it lots of spam emails? I'll not say phishing, but spam emails. Okay, so that's why I consider it as a high. The vulnerability, that is the lack of awareness trainings, unpatched endpoint protection, or any other, let's say, softwares which my endpoint will be having. Okay, I might consider it as a medium. Now again, that is subjective to me or my organization, because I might say that okay, the awareness training is something which actually I did, or let's say I sent out some flyers 2 weeks back or 3 weeks back, or let's say every month I'm sending out flyers. I'm not conducting an awareness training, but I'm sending out flyers, let's say. Okay. The unpatched endpoint protection, because I might have missed one or two, you can say, the patching cycles, right? Based upon that, I gave it a value of medium. So based upon these different values, these three different values of 4 as an asset value, then LHOT of high, and then ease of exploitation of medium, we come up with a value of 7. You'll see on the right hand of the screen, on the very corner, you have the 8 and then you have the 7. So that particular 7 value, then the last line, has been calculated by the asset value of 4, the LHOT value of high, and the ease of exploitation value of medium. Now, based upon these three things, we have come up with the value of 7. Now, if you remember, again, the challenges faced by the organization are that they do not have a risk acceptable, or let's say risk acceptance level, that okay, at which particular point in time they should say that okay, this is the risk which I can accept, that's fine. Okay, that is to be defined based upon this particular value of the measure of risk. Now, if let's say it comes as 7, now my organization says that okay, I have a risk acceptance value, or let's say risk acceptance value of only 5. In that particular case, I have to apply controls. Now, when you have to apply controls, that is the time when you go, or let's say move ahead from risk assessment and go to risk management. Okay. Now, risk management can be done in 4 ways. Risk management can be done, first of all, by applying the controls. That is by treating that particular risk, by treating that particular threat or treating that particular vulnerability. The next one will be that, okay, I can transfer it to a third party. The third one is tolerate. That is, if this particular risk value would have come, let's say 5 or 4, then my organization would have gone ahead and just accepted it. I wouldn't have even thought twice that, okay, I have to apply controls over it. Okay. So one is the treat, one is the tolerate, one is the transfer. Okay, treat, terminate, tolerate, transfer, and the last one is the terminate. That is, I'll be terminating the asset completely. I'll be making sure that there is no PII data which can be accessed by those employees, and that is when the risk value will be 0. Please remember, team. Whenever I say whosoever is telling you that they do not have a risk, it means that they do not have an asset. As far as assets are there, risk will be there. Okay, risk is directly proportional to an asset. If an asset is there, then risk will always be there. Based upon this entire scenario, we have performed the risk assessment. A few of the technical security controls which your organizations, or let's say which you guys can implement based upon the ransomware, are given on your screen, which starts from antivirus and anti-malware, of course, patched and everything. Security policies, which should block known payloads. Many of means for the very for the very fact, if you'll see right now, Windows firewalls, they have come up with many of you can say functionalities in which they can detect the ransomwares, in which they can detect the critical malwares as well. Okay, so that is something which you can go ahead and look at it. It's very you can say enlightening, which we saw. Then frequent and comprehensive backups of all the important files, so that let's say first of all I will encrypt my PII data that is kept on the system, Even if that particular somebody takes that particular thing or take the PII data, I will have a copy of it, so I do not have to rely on them, okay, at any point in time. Isolate important files from local open networks, offline backups, patch early and patch often, security software, cyber hygiene, segment your network. So micro segmentation is something which we always suggest to majority of our clients. Access rights based upon the need to know and least privileges. Education, awareness training is very much important. And a red team activity, so that your organization, or let's say red team activity, especially with respect to phishing scams, is something which each and every organization should do at the end of the day, so that they can understand how much their user awareness is actually effective and how many of them are actually clicking on the link and jeopardizing the security of the infrastructure. Because you'll believe me or not, but one of the biggest hospitality breach where around 500 million you can say records were compromised actually happened because one of the subsidiaries, you can say, user passwords were compromised. Two user passwords were compromised, which led to 500 million records getting breached at the end of the day. So please make sure for this. So on that, let's say particular note, we'll see that, okay, how exactly risk assessment is important during remote working sessions like which we are doing currently. It helps in capturing, analyzing, and prioritizing the security risk. It helps us to ensure that the remote access is secure. There are no negative impacts as such, or let's say it reduces the negative impacts as much as possible with the known and the unknown threats, absolutely. And the organization can find gaps and vulnerability in cybersecurity posture, so that accordingly they can implement, you can say, appropriate measures and close it off. Now, that covers majority of the risk assessment, or let's say mainly the risk assessment which we are focusing on. Now, this is something which, let's say, in our research we came up with, that is the Lincoln Laboratory. So these guys actually have a huge paper on this, and they talk about the attack model. That first of all, they say that, okay, let's understand the actual state of the organization, the actual state of the controls, the actual state of the risk to any organization, based upon which they will compute the risk. Now, again, computing the risk is one part. Excuse me. Computing the risk is one part, whereas prioritizing the risk and deciding on the actions is another part. Now, if you remember, once we were discussing the scope, at that time we also saw that the scope which is having the maximum risk, I will be performing the risk assessment more frequently, and I'll be giving it a higher value as well. And that is what they're talking about over here. That prioritize the risk and decide on actions and then act on it. Then act, or let's say implement controls around it. That is the risk management. Okay. So what they came up is that they have around 20 critical security controls. And they say that if you have a threat, any type of threat inside the organization, then you can manage it with one or two, or let's say three, or combination of these security controls. For example, they're saying if any user is performing actions that enable attacks, then they are saying go ahead and see the ninth critical security control, which is security skills assessment and appropriate training to fill gaps. Now, if let's say I'm talking about attackers exploit insecure configurations. So what they're saying, first of all, secure the configurations for hardware and software on mobile devices, laptops, workstations, and servers. Then they are saying wireless access control should be there, or let's say should be properly managed. Then they're saying limitation and control of network ports, protocols, and services. So it's a really nice, you can say, checklist which organizations can follow and accordingly preserve, or let's say secure their organizations from critical threats, so that they can just go ahead with a combination of one or the other. So the risk, the threats, the vulnerabilities, whatever we saw so much, let's say, lying around here and there, how exactly the future looks like. Based upon the Gartner study, they say that around 100% of the large enterprises actually have to report their cybersecurity posture, their cybersecurity rating to their management, which is actually 40%. Okay, 40% was into 2018. So by now, they should be reporting by around, let's say, around 40% of that. 71% of organizations say that their third-party networks contain more third parties that come as 3 years ago. It means that, let's say I have taken a particular service from ABC organization. Now that particular ABC organization will be having 5 different service providers for themselves. It means that your exposure area has increased twice or thrice or 4 times, because if, let's say, their service providers get compromised, then your service provider can also get compromised, and accordingly you might also get compromised, right? And that is the very reason why Gartner says that by 2022 cybersecurity ratings will also become as important as credit ratings while assessing the let's say the risk of business relationships. And that is what basically happened with one of the breaches, where that particular organization actually acquired let's say some business from some other organization, and they didn't even perform the due diligence, and that particular acquired organization was already breached. And after 4 years of acquisition, they got to know that even before they actually acquired the particular organization, they were already breached, which led to I think billions of records being exposed. So apart from let's say this from a governance standpoint, what exactly is there in the future is the threat intelligence, and that is something which I believe all the organizations should be looking at the end of the day. The threat intelligence feed. And what exactly is it? It will help you, or let's say your organizations, in understanding that, okay, who is attacking you, what exactly is the motivation and capabilities, and what indicators of compromise are there inside your system which they are looking for, which helps in reducing the risk by many, many times. Around 22% more security threats are actually identified before even they impact the organization. Organizations have implemented the threat intelligence feed, and they have seen that, okay, it results in an 86% reduction in unplanned downtime, and they have avoided around $1 million of, let's say, potential penalties or fines per breach, which is a huge step. So on that particular note, we'll just wind up the session with the lines of George Eliot. It's never too late to be what you might have been. So please make sure that you implement the security controls inside the organizations and have a threat-based thinking approach. A threat-based thinking is always proactive in nature, or let's say is always considered proactive in nature, while a risk-based thinking is basically reactive. After a particular incident, after a particular breach, after a particular risk has actually occurred, and a potential threat which is identified today will become a risk after the act has been perpetrated. So in short, today's threat is tomorrow's risk. Please make sure that you evaluate the risks which are happening across different domains, across different industries, and accordingly, let's say, protect your organization. So on that particular note, we'll say thanks a lot for joining our session. If you have any questions, then you can always you can say send us across an email, and we'll be able to help you across. So stay safe. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.